Let's go to the root of this. Donald Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear accords. It's a very sad time with war raging not just between Israel and the inhabitants of Gaza and Hamas, but now between two major powers, Israel and Iran, with casualties on both sides and a real danger of a wider war that could engulf the Middle East, and who knows how far it may spread after that. It's a very sobering and sober moment for everyone in America and everyone in the world. You know, I just lament the human condition that seems prone time and time and time again to try to futilely settle differences and disputes with violence, death, and destruction, which almost never solves anything except leading to more violence, death, and destruction. You know, supposedly World War I was the war to end all wars, right? And we've been in a constant state of war ever since the end of World War I, including the most devastating war in history, World War II, that claimed likely well over 60 million lives. And Sam, in these wars, is it the soldiers who suffer the most casualties?
Usually civilians.
It's
right?
usually civilians. It's innocent persons who have no part, who are killed, wounded, displaced.
Yeah, I'm starting to get sick of this line. I hear a lot of people using it since October 7th, and now it's like, well, that's just what it is with war. People die. It's like, can't we live in a society where we don't just throw up our hands when innocent people are killed because two governments are fighting? Why are we accepting this? We should be trying to change the world so that this is not a norm and that we don't just throw up our hands and just say, in wars, people die. It's like,
yeah,
let's stop having wars. Let's stop having civilian casualties during these wars. It's absurd.
It really is.
My question is, why is this happening? Who's to blame? And why is it happening now? Those are my three main questions.
Oh, little tiny questions.
Well, they're important
Sam.
things to answer right now.
Yeah. Well, let me answer them then as best as I can. First of all, you have two very bad actors. On the one hand, you have Prime Minister Netanyahu, who simply believes in death and destruction to solve problems. What he has done in Gaza is absolutely appalling and ghastly. They're not talking about, get this, Sam, 55,000 deaths
Jeez.
in Gaza, you know. And I'm not sure about the breakdown, but I guarantee most of them are civilians, or at least a very substantial proportion. And I'm not even talking about the displacement, the famine, the disease that's resulted from what Netanyahu has done. You know, he has forfeited the moral high ground that Israel and the Jewish people have held for so long. And I never would have thought I'd see the day that Israel would become an international pariah because of the atrocities that it committed against another people.
Even if you take Israel's word for it, and, you know, they're really just targeting Hamas leaders, and Hamas is hiding behind civilians, even if you take that all to be true, which is up for debate, they're doing a pretty shitty job of hitting. Like,
yeah,
you would think they would do a little, like, they would try to reduce the civilian casualty a little bit more than 55,000.
Well, that's not all civilians, but yeah, they're indiscriminately killing.
Right.
They're not letting aid come in. People are starving. People are getting sick. They're hitting hospitals. They're hitting refugee camps.
Right, and even if Hamas is hiding in these hospitals, right, Israel, you need to do a better job at hitting the Hamas leaders that are under these hospitals than just bombing the hospitals and killing, you know, a couple hundred civilians a pop every time you do it.
Yeah, I mean, the history of this war is not going to be a very positive one for anyone, not for Hamas. You know, I am not a Hamas supporter.
No, I am not. Hamas is
not.
Worse than Netanyahu, or just as bad, right, whatever you want to say.
Yeah. As I said, this will not be written positively for anyone, not for Hamas, and sadly, not for Netanyahu. And, you know, as a Jewish person, I deeply resent Trump and his cronies equating support for Israel with support for Netanyahu.
I know, it's so annoying.
That is so awful. I have been a supporter of Israel for well over 50 years. I am not a supporter of Netanyahu. I am an American patriot. You know, I've done as much as I could for our country, but I'm not a supporter of President Donald Trump.
Right.
That does not mean I hate my country like Donald Trump is always denigrating his critics. Just means I'm against the current leadership.
Right. Their logic in all this is about, you know, a fifth grader's logic.
At best. I'm not even sure it would pass.
It's surprising to me that people
grade.
take that kind of logic seriously, but some people do for some reason. I don't
and
get
of course, you got bad actors in Iran as well.
Of course.
You know, this horrific Ayatollah Khomeini and his repressive, terroristic regime. So it's bad actors all around.
And a lot of Iranian citizens do not like the Islamic State that they live in Iran, and a lot of
Israelis don't like Netanyahu.
Right.
Probably, you know, in a free and fair election prior to his, you know, wagging the dog and going after Iran, he'd have lost. And you know, he barely won last time. You know, there's tremendous dissent from Netanyahu.
Yeah, it seemed like Israel had gotten rid of him.
Yeah, they came close.
Right, and then he came.
Yeah, and he was under indictment too for corruption.
Oh my God!
You know, the Donald Trump of Israel. It's a pretty accurate moniker.
I think he's worse than Trump. At least, I mean, Trump doesn't have thousands of bodies on his name.
Not yet. I hope he does. Well, that's another point. We'll get to him.
Okay.
Whether he will get involved in this war.
Right.
But let's go to the root of this. Donald Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear accords.
So you think that's the real cause of all this?
I think that's the root. I mean, all these other things I've mentioned are part and parcel.
Right, and I've seen people arguing that he pulled out because a lot of Israeli lobbyists and government officials pressured him to pull out.
That's certainly true, but I think there's another reason he pulled out.
Okay, go ahead.
He was against anything with Obama's name on it.
Right.
I don't care if it's the nuclear accords, the Paris Accords, the Affordable Care Act, DACA, it doesn't matter. Anything with Obama's name on it, he was against. And, you know, his arguments against it were totally flimsy. First of all, let's understand, this treaty was not ever designed, and by the way, it took 2 years to negotiate, to turn Iran into a liberal democratic democracy, to stop its sponsorship of terrorism. That was never a part of this accord. It had one purpose and one purpose only. And what was that, Sam?
Stop proliferation.
To stop the development of a nuclear weapon. You know, far more important than anything else. And yes, we made concessions to Iran, including, you know, the lifting of some significant sanctions and the unfreezing of certain funds. But guess what, Sam?
What?
You don't make a treaty unless you give up something.
Right. Isn't that the whole idea of politics and treaties and diplomacy?
Yes, it's negotiations. Of course, we had to make some concessions to Iran. Do you think they would have signed this treaty for nothing?
Right.
But again, well worth it, because the greatest danger they could possibly pose is a nuclear weapon. And then, of course, he attacked the substance of the treaty. In fact, the treaty pretty well effectively postponed any even beginning of the development of a nuclear weapon or atomic weapon by Iran for 13 to 15 years. I'm not going to go over every provision, but here are just a couple of critical ones. For 13 years, Iran agreed to eliminate its stockpile of medium-enriched uranium and to cut its stockpile of low-enriched uranium by 98%. Do you know why that's important for enriched uranium?
That's how you make weapons.
Yes,
right?
You have to have enriched uranium, and if they're eliminating it and cutting it by 98% for 13 years, they have to start all over again. Moreover, For 15 years, Iran agreed to enrich uranium only to 3.67%, well below the threshold needed for building nuclear weapons, and not to build heavy water facilities, essential and to reduce by 2/3 the number of its glass centrifuges. So there was a lot in this treaty that I said, it would be 13 to 15 years down the road from its implementation in 2016, not 2025, when they'd even be able to begin, presuming they would, when it wasn't renewed. And, the argument that it wasn't being enforced, that Iran was cheating, absolutely fabricated. The Trump administration certified this is the Trump administration, not Obama, in April 2017 and in July 2017 that Iran was complying with the nuclear accords. I'll repeat that. The Trump administration certified, shortly before Trump withdrew, that Iran was complying with the deal. Moreover, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, no flaming liberal, right, Sam?
F that guy.
Yeah. Said Mike Pompeo and the International Atomic Energy Agency, the agency tasked with verifying and monitoring Iran's compliance, said that Iran has been in compliance with the accords and there is no evidence otherwise. So, aside from getting revenge on Obama, none of the substantive arguments hold water. Treaty was not designed to transform the nature of the Iranian regime. You had to give up some concessions to get the deal. The deal was very strong over a 13 to 15-year period, and according to Trump administration officials and the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran was complying at the very time that Trump pulled out. So Trump pulls out. And what did he promise, Sam, when he pulled out?
He would give us a better deal.
Yeah, and what kind of deal did he get?
I don't think he's gotten a deal.
Zero, none.
But he always does that bullshit. He's always like, with...
I'm going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours.
Not only that, but he always promises, this great, better deal whenever he wants to slash some existing deal.
Remember the big, beautiful health care plan that he was going to replace Obamacare with?
But I just don't understand who keeps falling for this bullshit.
I don't. And my big infrastructure day,
right,
that I'm going to have, and immediately, going to drastically reduce prices and slash the deficit.
Yeah.
So all he accomplished was solidifying extremists in Iran, who now could argue we were betrayed by the great devil, the United States, undermining any kind of opposition to the extremist Islamic government, and then removed any incentives for Iran not to develop the means to produce a nuclear weapon. It may not be imminent, but they are certainly far more advanced than they would have been. Still would have been blocked from doing anything significant under the Iran nuclear accords. So instead of enforcing non-proliferation by treaty, negotiations, concessions on both sides, 2 years of negotiations, we've now resorted to horrific violence on both sides. It is absolutely an unforced error, a preventable amount of death and destruction that should never have happened.
So how much blame do you put on Donald Trump then?
A lot.
A ton?
A ton.
I mean, obviously Netanyahu is the one sending
the immediate
bombs,
Netanyahu and
Iran
the leadership, of
sending
course.
bombs back.
Yeah, you heard me attack them in no uncertain terms, but the underlying problem is Donald Trump, and there's a deeper problem here.
Okay.
This is what happens when you base policy not on what's good for the American people or good for the people of the world, but on revenge and retribution.